Hi everyone, and welcome to Who's He on the TV. It's Halloween week, and in this episode, I'm going to be taking a quick look at one of my favourite TV horror stories, During Barty's Party. Written by Nigel Kneale of Quatermass fame, During Barty's Party was the second episode of the horror anthology series Beasts, which was broadcast on British television from October to November in 1976. Each story was themed on bestial horror, and some of them really had a more supernatural, psychological aspect to their respective stories. Now, despite me being a somewhat casual fan of Nigel Kneale's output over the years, Beast is a very up and down affair, with one episode in particular, Buddy Boy, a story about the ghost of a dolphin haunting an old aquarium. Yes, you did hear that right, being a particular low point. However, the absolute highlight of this series is During Barty's Party, whose plot is basically about a middle-aged and middle-class couple under siege from a horde of intelligent rats. With them being unable to escape their home, the only chance of getting help is through the radio show Barty's Party, which has had listeners phoning in with sightings of rats roaming the countryside. Now, before I go any further, yes, there are some comparisons to be made with horror author James Herbert's book, The Rats, published in 1974. But while that book was a staple of my childhood, with kids gathered round a classmate in the playground as they read out the naughty bits and the bits where the rats ate another character, During Barty's Party is a lot more restrained. In fact, you don't see a single rat during its 50-minute running time. And for me, that's the show's genius. Now, I don't know if Nigel Kneale wrote it this way, but the absence of any physical rodents on screen plays to the strengths of the show that was made on probably a very tight budget, and also the restraints of what 1970s TV special effects could offer. I mean, how many times have you watched a creature feature only to be disappointed by a lackluster man in a yak fur suit? Well, During Barty's Party doesn't make that mistake. The rats in this story make their presence felt by sound alone. So what starts off as a single rat scuttling under the floorboards and ending with the sound of thousands of rats trying to break through the doors and floorboards, the building crescendo of sound just keeps the viewer on edge. But the other aspect that sells this story is the actors. During Barty's Party is a two-hander between actors Elizabeth Sellers and Anthony Bates as Angie and Roger Truscott. Both seasoned actors on film and television, they both start this story as any typical middle-class couple on British television in the 1970s would do. Roger is in middle management, while Angie is a nervy stay-at-home housewife. I mean, seriously, British television would have you believe that women did nothing in the 1970s other than wait for their husbands to come home. And of course, being middle class, they both drink copious amounts of whiskey and wine after a stressful day before settling down to supper, while the rest of us would have just, had our teas. Anyway, it's this middle class domestication that sets up the horror. In this, Anthony Bates Roger, a rational man who is not given to flights of fancy, scoffs at his wife's idea of intelligent rats and is even more horrified that Angela listened to the awful Barty's Party radio show, even though their lives may very well depend on it. But while Nigel Kneale's script makes us assume that Roger's clear, rational thinking will save the day, it's actually Elizabeth Sellers' Angela who takes affirmative action in contacting Barty's Party radio show to ask for help. Now, you may be thinking that why don't Roger and Angela just call the police or just make a run for it, rather than phoning a radio show? Well, all of this is explained in the story, and it all makes sense. But of course, with this horror relying on sound throughout, other characters in this are only heard on the radio or on the telephone. And this plays into the isolation of Roger and Angela, who feel more and more hopeless as the minutes of this episode tick by. Obviously, the main voice you hear is Barty himself. Now, I have a feeling that Nigel wasn't a particular fan of this kind of DJ, as he's written as someone who constantly talks over listeners who phone into his show, and, is just rather annoying in general. Voiced by Colin Bell, Barty is played as someone who's more, interested in the sound of his own voice and playing annoying jingles, even when he does try to help Roger and Angela, he's not listening puts their lives in even greater peril. And it's the tell but not show approach that makes this terrifying. A person's imagination is far more horrifying than any special effect. Roger and Angela's never-seen dog, which was sent out by Angela to hunt the rat, but never returns. A rat expert who phones into Barty's party but cannot be contacted again after he went out to bait his traps. And then, then there are the Gibsons, Roger and Angela's neighbours. Again, they are never seen, but heard towards the end of the episode. Their late night arrival back home is one of the most horrifying parts of the story, and it brings Angela's theory that the rats are intelligent into very, very sharp focus. But what holds this story together is the performances of Elizabeth Sellers and Anthony Bate. Sellers plays Angela as a neurotic who reaches for that bottle of wine and takes sleeping pills, but her resolve and her belief may just be the one thing that can keep them both alive. Well, Anthony Bates' Roger, full of bluster and blaming Angela for the predicament they are in because she picked a useless dog, sees this supposed man of rationality break down in the face of reality and cries out to his wife like a scared child. It's this role reversal that I like and, to my mind, very uncommon for a TV show of its time. And I think Sellers and Bates play these parts extremely well. The stiff upper lip style of acting from Anthony Bates is perfect for the character of Roger, while Elizabeth Sellers' portrayal of Angela's nervy housewife who's trying to convince her husband that something is wrong is, for me, is just spot on. Also spot on is the direction by Don Taylor, who also went on to direct some of the episodes of the BBC horror anthology series Dead of Night. With its very slow start, he builds the tension throughout the story by pointing the camera at seemingly innocuous locations such as under a cupboard or at the bottom of the floor. He lures the viewer into thinking something's going to burst out at any moment. With the use of sound and the less is more approach to the visuals, I think Don Taylor makes extremely good use of making a middle-class home a terrifying location for a last stand against nature. But what happens to Roger and Angela? Well, I'm not going to spoil that for you. If you don't want to splash out on the DVD, this is also available to watch on YouTube, so there is no excuse. Go and watch it. I really don't think you'll be disappointed at watching this Halloween. So, until next time, goodbye. Oh, and don't ignore those scratching noises coming from under the floor.